Hello, everybody. You're listening to Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs, and I'm your host, Shelby Oleschlager. My mission here is to help entrepreneurs make a difference and navigate the messy world of startup or relaunch. Join me today where we dig deep with our guests to give you the best concepts and strategies to fast track your business. Today, our special guest is Bill Flynn. So, Bill, I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for joining us today. And to get started, please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Shelby. It's a pleasure to be with you. When I describe myself, I sort of say I'm a pragmatic Simon Sinek because I'm an optimist and also an operator. I've done 10 startups over about a 25-year career, all in tech here in the Boston area, all different kinds of industries, et cetera. I generally am the front-facing, COO or GM. I've run a bunch of different sales organizations, been a CMO a couple times as well. My track record is decent. I'm either 5 for 10 or 5 for 7, depending on how you judge my contribution to those things. But either way, still a pretty decent thing. And I've learned a lot of stuff that hopefully, as I say, I can help your audience make their own mistakes and hopefully have them avoid some of the ones that I made that helped me to learn to be better at what I'm doing.
Of course. And I feel like it always takes that going through it. Sometimes the trial and error, you really learn so much. So with that being said, I'm curious, has there been one really big thing that you've learned from your startups that now you're able to take with some of the businesses and clients that you're helping today?
Yeah. The one big thing that I've found is that you really need to find a problem that's worth solving. Many startups are the genesis of them is that the person who started the business either had something that they saw that they thought needed to be fixed, or they thought they could do a better job at, or someone close to them, which is great. And that's certainly a great way to start. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be enough people out there that will give you enough money to make a real business out of it. So my advice is always to fall in love with the problem and the customer versus the idea. Ideas are great and they certainly help move business and countries and the world forward. But if there's a great saying by, I think Ash Maurya says this a lot, which is life is too short to build something that nobody wants. So I think really sort of taking your ego out of it and really falling in love with the idea is something you want to try to avoid, because the idea may be tangential to what works, but I've done 10 startups and I'd say, maybe there's one of them that the original idea was the thing that actually was what the market accepted. There was always a change. Either it'd be a market change or even a small pivot to what you're doing. So that would be my advice is I've learned is fall in love with the problem and the customer. And it certainly has to align with your passion and what you're good at. But if those 2 or 3 things come together, then you'll have a much better chance of breaking this. It's really not a great track record for most startups. I've heard anywhere between 75 to 90% of startups fail. And I think that's the main reason is that they fall in love with the idea too much and are too busy trying to sell people on their idea than trying to figure out if there's a problem worth solving for those folks. And I'll tell one quick story is I was with about 10 or 15 years ago, I was with a founder of a company and I was asked to come in as a consultant to help them sell their product. And we went to 3 meetings over a period of time. And at the end of every meeting, the founder said, would turn to me or just sort of grumble that they just don't get it. And after the third meeting, I turned to him and said, I think your sentence is absolutely correct. I said, but I think your pronouns are wrong. They don't have to get it. It's not their job to get what you have. It's your job to figure out if you can help them. They're too busy trying to solve all sorts of problems. You want them to say, where have you been all my life? Not, wow, you're a really smart guy. So that's sort of that's my take on what I've learned over 20 some odd years of doing this.
Hmm. Yeah, just the ability, it makes me think of being more flexible, like you said, with the outcome, instead of just loving that idea that you initially had. Like you said, love the problem and the customers, which then will allow you to make those pivots more naturally and kind of allow yourself to let go of the idea and best serve the people, which does make a lot of sense. So when you've been doing these startups, obviously they've been scaling and growing, and that's a lot of questions that people have. So how was that process like for you with all these startups, of making it the concept to actually growing it and scaling it?
I think it's very tied to what I mentioned earlier. And I'll tell a story. I was at a company that was still a startup, even though it was years old. They hadn't quite gotten the product market fit, and luckily they had some very patient investors. And it was, I think it was started in the late 90s, but I didn't join. I think I joined around 2005. And it was an online data backup company. And I was brought in as the head of sales to help them try to scale the company. And I did what I had done relatively consistently and continued to do after that, is I would come in and they already had a product, an idea, and they had some customers. So I wanted to talk to those people that were happy. And we're getting value out of the product. So I asked them to give me some names. They gave me 20, 25 names. And I basically interviewed them. And the gist of what I was trying to do was sort of a cause and effect. Why did you purchase the product? And are you getting the value? Is it making your life easier in some way? Before I went and had these conversations, I asked a bunch of people, usually in marketing or that have been there a while, the founder. I said, why do you think your customers that are happy buy from you? And it was a great answer, which was insurance. They basically said it's an insurance play, basically. So they're paying us a few dollars a month. So if their data gets corrupted or something happens, then they'll get all of it or most of it back relatively quickly. So it was sort of just like you would pay for insurance, right? Just when something happens, you don't expect anything to ever happen. And I said, great. I'd love to get a chance to hear what the clients came to say. And when I asked them, one question I asked, which was sort of the pivotal question, which is, what's the most valuable thing that you got from using our product? And I was very specific to use the word thing. I didn't want to use feature or benefit or whatever. I didn't want to bias them in any way to say something. And I was very clear on, I wanted to know what they got out of it, not why did they like us, right? I wanted to say, what was a valuable thing that you got out of it? And most of the people I talked to, I think I ended up talking to 17 different people, and 12 out of the 17 said almost the exact same words to me, which was, when I asked that question, what's the most valuable thing that you got from using this product, was set it and forget it. So we were selling insurance, right? We were selling peace of mind or whatever, but they were buying time. They were buying convenience, right? Super busy small to medium business owners. They said, look, so if I use your product, I don't have to get a tape anymore. I don't have to change them. I don't have to keep an eye on them. I don't have to make sure I store them well. I have to make sure that they're labeled well, all those kind of things. It was a pain in the neck. She said, all I have to do is push a few buttons and then never have to think about it again. They were very excited about that. Like, how much does that cost? I'd pay a lot of money for that. So that was a big difference. And the team that I was working with, I said, look, when you're talking to a prospect, say, this is what our best customers say when we ask them, why do they work with us? And we beat every month, and every quarter was better than the last quarter. We kept growing and scaling. About 18 months later from me joining, Iron Mountain bought us for about 10 times revenue, which was great. It wasn't just because of that. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was foundational that worked underneath that. But I think that was a really good example of when you take your ego out of it, as you said, and really understand why someone buys from you. Because when I ask a lot of, I used to speak a lot to CEOs, and when I asked them what's your customer value proposition? I mean, why do people buy from you? The answer I got basically back from them was, because we're awesome, we're great. And I'd say, you know what, you probably are, but that's very likely not the reason why they're buying from you. There's something that they're getting from this relationship that you're providing And you need to make it about them, not about you. So that's sort of what I learned. That was sort of a major lesson I learned on how to scale a business is once you've sort of got the product in there and you think you have a product market fit, you need to make sure that you ask compassionate questions and empathetic questions as opposed to pushing them. I think that's always a benefit for most folks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like just about the whole ego aspect or kind of letting go of that is, like you just said, it's about them, not you. It's not about you being awesome, right? And I feel we have a hard time with that because we're always focused about ourselves. So you did mention just about, like you're helping with teams and whatnot. And a lot of it is about being a really good leader and setting up, you said like having a productive society. So can you talk a little bit about that, of how we can, if, like run an organization and really show up as a good leader?
Yeah, sure. So once, this is what I believe, is that once you've gotten through that product market fit knot hole, and you're starting to have some repeatability and scalability in your business, your leadership should change because it's a different kind of company. And I'd say, first you got to go back and look at all the critical decisions that you made and say, okay, if now that we're where we are today, would we make those same decisions moving forward? Because starting up and scaling up are two different things. Because in my opinion, your job as a leader, once you've gotten through that product market fit knot hole and you're starting to see some scalability, is to fire yourself as much as you can from the day-to-day of running of the business. Because your job is no longer to survive and figure out, do we have something worth a problem worth solving? It's now to scale the business, and that's about predicting the future. Right now, you're a leader, and we talk about leadership as a thing, and I think it's really hard to say that if you do these 5 things, you'll become a great leader, because if you look at great leaders, they're all really very different. They have different personalities. They've had different styles. They have different focuses on what they do. They really get the most out of their own style, right? So someone like Steve Jobs, who's often would be considered a great leader, but when I go to these conferences and they give me attributes, they have to have on honesty, integrity, charisma, service, whatever. If you read stories about Steve Jobs, he didn't have the best integrity, right? He would do things that would not be considered to show integrity. But the people who followed him said that whatever it was about him was stronger of a pull than some of these other attributes that they have. So I think that's what the best leaders do, is they figure out, how to take the fullest advantage of what they're really good at, what they love to do, and then give themselves time to think about the future, right? And the way to do that is you have to start firing yourself on the day-to-day. Activity and productivity are two different things. Most leaders think if they have a line outside their door and they're constantly answering questions, that they're helping, and maybe they're helping in the short term, but that's not the long term. The long term is for the people who are running the business to do it in an autonomous way. I like to say to my clients that when 3 months or so have passed, and you were on vacation or whatever, if that's sort of what happened, no one outside the company would know that you weren't there. That's when you're a good leader, because from a day-to-day perspective, the company's being run well because you've taught everyone what to do. You've set the direction, you've set the guidelines on how to do it. You've done all that work with the standards to run the business. And now you have much more time to focus on the next thing, the next growth curve of the business, right? And if we go back to Jobs, it was, when he came back the second time, he trimmed down the product line from well over a dozen products to 4, so he could be profitable, and he needed to save money. And then because he needed to save time, to create time, because he didn't know what the next thing was. And the next thing was the iTunes and iPod, right? And then the next thing was the iPhone, and the next thing after that was the iPad, and we got the watch and all that stuff. So I think that's what he did really well, is he gave himself time to think about, and his leadership team think about what's next, as opposed to how do we, make the quarter or make the week or make the month?
Right. Yeah. Just that long-term thinking and giving yourself that time and space to actually keep doing that and keep doing what you're good at. I really like the saying of firing yourself from the day to day, because it's so true. And I think you almost do have to look at it that way, where you're kind of firing yourself from doing those tasks. And then you're able to find someone that you can delegate it to. So you can, like you said, take care of the future and the goals. So I'm curious now, since you've been learning and failing and growing with all these startups that you've been working on, now to actually advising other companies. So what was that transition like from being involved in the startups to now helping other people with their own businesses?
It was a great transition from a sort of a psychic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I found that, I now know what a calling is. I definitely love what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Time flies when I'm doing it. I often do it for free. So that's been great. Whenever I'm with a client, it's funny, whenever I have a session with a client, it's usually an all-day session, or if it's remote, it's a half-day session. I'm always a little anxious and nervous. But once I get in there, it just time flies and it's so much fun. And I love being able to provide a different way to think about things and ask good questions so they can help themselves. So that's been great. I think just like starting any business, it was difficult from a commercial perspective. It took a while to start to, get some clients and to start making money. That was a lot more difficult. It took about 2 years to sort of pay my bills, if you will. Because I started from scratch. I started from nothing at all, no clients whatsoever. So that was a difficult part. Much better now. I have, making a decent amount of money. I certainly want to grow more my business, but it's now in a much better place than it was now that I'm sort of 5 or 6 years in.
Yeah, for sure. And it is a process, right? So how, I guess, now that you've built some clients and whatnot, is there any sort of what were the things that actually worked for you to start building that audience and showing up as the authority in that way?
Yeah. So I gave away a lot of my time at the beginning, right? Now I've been researching business success and failure for 30 years, really a lot in the last 5 or 6. So I had all that to help me and to provide me with tools and resources to help others. So I did come off as an authority. I got there's some testimonials on my site, but there was one that I really like, which if I remember correctly, it's Bill is the most value per word of any coach or consultant we've ever worked with. Nice. So that was great, right? That's what I want to do. I want to be able to add value and not take up a lot of space and a lot of time for them, really help them to get down to the essence of what they need to do to be successful. So doing that, I did a lot of speaking. I wrote a book as well. So that's been helpful, but mostly it's been really giving away my time and finding partners that have relationships with the mindset of the person that would most likely be a good client for me. When people come to me and say, what can you describe for me a great client? And they're looking for attributes. They're looking for size of company, how long they've been, the industry they're in, et cetera. And I say, with a couple exceptions, pretty much any business can benefit from working with someone like me, because I work from a principle base. It's not specific to industry. I'm teaching some very first principle kind of thinking. And so I'm looking for a humble, hungry learner who's comfortable challenging the status quo. I say, if they're that kind of person and they can afford working with me, I can help them. If they don't have even one of those attributes, it's much more difficult to help them. I often say, I'm not looking for a needle in a haystack. I'm looking for a needle in a stack of needles. Those types of leaders are rare. I think they're becoming less rare. I think we seem to be more enlightenment, and we're seeing a lot more stories about the kind and thoughtful leaders, the compassionate leaders, versus the ones that were charismatic and and such. We're moving away from that sort of Western myth of the hero, right? The person who knows everything. And it's been a long time getting there. Jim Collins has been talking about this for 25 or so years. The genius with 1,000 helpers. I think we're finally realizing we're getting away from that. You can't know everything. You need to surround yourself with great brains. You need to give them some direction. Lead them. Tell them this is where we're going. Describe what that looks like, and then get out of their way. Right. And that's, I think we're finding more and more of that, but that's what I've been my experience on how to do that.
Yeah. And it all I love entrepreneurship because it is so much of personal development and growth. So I find people are a lot more in tune with that aspect of how it completely correlates to their businesses. So they are able to say, hey, like I need help, and they're willing to admit that instead of, like you said, how it's been before. Now that you've been building this business, I'm curious, what are your next steps look like? Like where would you like to see yourself in, let's say, a year from now?
Yeah. So I'd like to have a few more clients. I certainly love working with folks, and that would help me personally just have a cushion, because, are we going into recession or not? Those things are always out there. And although my clients do stay with me for quite a long time, that's always something. But my goal, I have, all the things that I work with my clients on, I do myself, so I've set a long-term, a BHAG, if you will, and all those types of things. So besides, sort of just the commercial aspect and income, I'd like to find platforms to hopefully take that quota that I mentioned, about adding value per word and reaching a larger audience, right? So doing podcasts like this or speaking to larger audience. I've had some opportunities to do that, but minimal. I'd like to write more books, but I don't really like writing. I'm not very good at it. I actually didn't write my book. I spoke my book, and I had someone write it for me. She is a much better writer than I am. But if there's an opportunity to do that, that's sort of what I want to do. I think you sort of mentioned that. I want to be able to help leaders because, most of our adult life is spent at work, and most people don't like work. It's work, right? They're not enjoying themselves. They're not looking forward to, not every day, but most days of going in, and sort of they feel that autonomy, and they feel they're making a contribution, and they're feeling they're making a difference. They're part of something bigger than themselves. That's what I want to help people understand, that that's your job. And it's not generally what we've been taught, at least certainly in my generation. We were not taught that, right? We were taught about how to manage people, right? And how to get people to do things. And I think, I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek, and it doesn't work that way. Motivation is intrinsic. It's something that comes from within. And your job is to create the conditions for that, not to just provide extrinsic motivators. You have to, there's a great saying that I like is, when a flower doesn't bloom, you don't, sort of blame it and change the flower. You change the environment the flower is in, right? You put it in more sun, or more shade, or you water it more, whatever it is. You create those conditions for growth. And I think, too often we make it harder on ourselves than it needs to be. And it's a shame that really good ideas, really good people, and really good businesses either fail or struggle. The data is pretty clear. Most businesses fail or struggle. Very few thrive. But those reasons for the struggle and not making it are preventable. We have seen it. We have seen really great leaders turn companies around or start companies and run them in a really phenomenal way and make great conditions for growth. It's a lot easier. It's easier than we've been taught. And so that's what I like to do, is try to reach as many people as possible before I stop doing this.
Yeah, that's a great goal. And like just having that core purpose, I think, is really important, and knowing like the more people you reach, the more impact. And you have such a good message that you're trying to bring across, which is awesome. And definitely, if more people can know that and how to be a good leader, that it will make that good ripple effect in society. And hopefully people, will start be able to share their own good messages and whatnot. So for people listening, yeah, exactly. So for people listening that really resonated with you, I'd like to know, tell us a little bit about what your ideal client would look like and where they can find you.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's a leader or head of company, whatever it might be. It's that mindset I mentioned, the humble, hungry learner who's comfortable challenging status quo. That's really the person I'm looking for that leads that group. Mm-hmm. And the best place to find me is on my website, which is catalystgrowthadvisors.com. And my book is on there. I actually give my book away for free. If you want to download it as a PDF, you can certainly get it from Amazon or Audible as well. I do write a blog post. I have about 150 short little blog posts, about a minute to 2 minute read, almost always actionable, focused around these types of things. How to run a great team, how to run a great meeting, how to do things. It's very operational focus. And my, all my contact info is there as well. So it's www.catalystgrowthadvisors.com.
Perfect. I always like to finish off these interviews with one final piece of advice that you'd like to leave all the listeners with, that maybe something actionable or just some final words. What would it be?
Yeah. So if you want to be a leader, since we're talking about that, is there have been a bunch of studies that I've read, and they generally say the same thing, that the people that you're leading want two things from you as a leader. One is they want to know whatever you tell them is true, because trust arrives on foot and leaves in a Ferrari. Right? If you break that trust, it takes a long time to get it back, or to build it back up. I don't think you lose complete trust. I think it's more of a battery than an on-off switch. But it takes a while. And you do that 2 or 3 times and you've probably lost it forever. So make sure that whatever you tell them is true. You don't necessarily have to tell them everything. Sometimes you can't say things because it's not appropriate. And the second thing is that they've learned, that I learned from these studies, is that they want to know, where are we going? You need to tell them where you're going. You're a leader, and you want to tell them where you're leading them to. Too often, I think we believe as leaders that people know what's in our head, and they don't. You have to say it over and over and over again. So I'm a big fan of writing down your vision. Right? What does it look like in 3 or 4 years, or whatever it might be? What will that look like if we've done what we wanted to do? And you should describe it as if it's already happened, and then that will help people to really get a sense of where you're going. Most businesses are run in the rearview mirror as opposed to the front window, and you need to give them that front window view, right? Where are we headed? Where are we going? So I think if you do those two things as a leader, you're in a much better position to have the people, to create followers and have people help you get to where you want to go.
That's perfect. That's really good advice. And I mean, I definitely am taking stuff away from this conversation. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today on this show. And hopefully people that resonate with you will be able to find you and work together, and you can keep sharing your messages and impacting the world.
Thanks, Shelby. Great to be on.